Have you ever wondered what actually happens to a person's soul when they lose everything in a single night? Not just their money, but their dignity, their family, and the person they thought they'd spend forever with? They say money can't buy happiness, but in the world of the ultra-elite, it's the only thing that buys you a seat at the table. Without it, you aren't just poor. You're invisible. This is the incredible story of Clara Caldwell. A woman who started as the crown jewel of a shipping empire, was stripped of her name and thrown into the gutter by her own blood, and lived for 3 years as a nobody in a world that forgotten she existed. But this isn't just a story about a fall from grace. This is about a rise so calculated, and a reveal so powerful, it redefined the meaning of the word empire. Close your eyes and imagine the Monarch Gala. The air is thick with the scent of $1,000 lilies and vintage champagne. Isabella, Clara's sister, stands in the center of the ballroom, her hand draped over the man she stole from Clara 3 years ago. She looks at Clara, standing there in a simple, off-the-rack dress, and she laughs. It's a sound like breaking glass. Isabella points a diamond-encrusted finger at the man standing beside Clara. A man in a worn suit. A man Isabella calls a peasant. He's a nobody. Isabella's voice rings out, silencing the orchestra. You went from a mansion to a trailer park, Clara. Look at him. He's nothing. But then the room goes cold. The CEO of the world's largest bank stops mid-stride. The Prime Minister drops his glass. And Adrian, the man Isabella just insulted, slowly adjusts his cufflinks. He doesn't shout. He doesn't argue. He simply looks at the room, and the most powerful men in the world, men who could buy and sell Isabella's entire life 10 times over, do something no one expected. They bow. But to understand how we got to that ballroom floor, we have to go back. Back to the night the rain didn't stop. 3 years ago, Clara was the girl who had it all. She was days away from marrying Marcus, the man of her dreams. She thought her sister, Isabella, was her best friend. She was wrong. In one calculated move, Isabella framed Clara for a crime she didn't commit, stole her inheritance, and took Marcus into her own bed. Clara walked out of her home with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart that had been turned to ash. She spent years working double shifts, sleeping in a cramped apartment, and learning the hard way that the world doesn't care if you're hurting. Then she met Adrian. He was a mechanic. Or so she thought. He was the only person who saw her when she was invisible. He was the only one who loved the woman, not the heiress. Clara thought she was protecting him from the cruelty of her former life. She thought she was bringing a nobody into a den of lions when she agreed to attend that gala. She didn't realize that she wasn't walking into a trap. She was walking into her coronation. What Isabella and Marcus are about to find out is that you should never mistake silence for weakness. Because while they were busy playing with stolen millions, Adrian was busy ruling the world from the shadows. But what you're about to discover in this story will change how you think about success and revenge forever. The greatest weapon isn't a bank account. It's the truth that stays hidden until the perfect moment to strike. Before we begin this incredible 1-hour journey, I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and 25 hours to produce. Every detail you're about to hear was carefully verified and crafted to bring you the most compelling version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication and love stories where justice finally catches up to those who think they're untouchable, please hit the subscribe button. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth stories for you. Before we dive into the first chapter of Clara's revenge, I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose everything? Is it luck, or is it character? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to that rainy night 3 years ago. The night the princess of Caldwell Shipping became a ghost. Before the world knew Clara Caldwell as a ghost, they knew her as the sun. To understand the depth of Clara's fall, you have to understand the height from which she was pushed. In the elite zip codes of Greenwich, Connecticut, the name Caldwell wasn't just a surname, it was a currency. Clara lived a life that most people only see through a filtered lens on social media. She woke up in a penthouse overlooking Central Park that cost a staggering $22 million. Her closet was filled with custom Chanel and Dior, and her biggest stress was whether the family's 150-foot yacht, the Serafina, would be docked in Monaco or St. Tropez for the summer. She was the vice president of Caldwell Shipping, managing a portfolio worth over $400 million. But Clara wasn't just a Nepo baby. She was brilliant. She had graduated top of her class at Wharton and spent 16 hours a day expanding her father's legacy. She was the perfect daughter, the perfect boss, and most importantly, she thought she was the perfect fiancé. Then there was Marcus. Marcus Thorne. He was a venture capitalist with a smile that could melt the coldest boardroom. When he proposed to Clara with a 7-carat emerald-cut diamond worth $450,000, the world stopped. The tabloids called them the golden couple. Clara truly believed she had found the one person who saw her for who she was, not just for her trust fund. She felt safe. She felt loved. And in that safety she made her first and most fatal mistake. She stopped looking over her shoulder. Enter Isabella, Clara's half-sister. Isabella was the result of their father's brief, scandalous affair. While Clara was being groomed for the CEO chair, Isabella was the charity case brought into the house to keep up appearances. She lived in the same mansion, ate the same caviar, but she was always in the shadow. "I don't mind being second, Clara," Isabella would whisper with a sweet, practiced smile. "I'm just happy to be part of the family." "I should have seen it then," Clara would later think. The way her eyes lingered a second too long on my engagement ring. The way she always knew exactly how Marcus liked his coffee. Clara was so blinded by her own happiness that she didn't see the resentment rotting Isabella from the inside out. She didn't see the secret meetings. She didn't see the way Marcus and Isabella looked at each other when she left the room. Pause. The first sign of the cracks appeared during the merger of the decade. Caldwell Shipping was about to acquire a European logistics giant in a deal worth $1.2 billion. It was Clara's masterpiece. But behind the scenes, a paper trail was being forged. Tiny, digital footprints were being planted in Clara's private server. Documents showing diversion of funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Clara's blind spot wasn't her intelligence. It was her heart. She had given Isabella her own private login credentials because family helps family. She had given Marcus power of attorney over her personal holdings because marriage is a partnership. She handed them the knife and pointed exactly where to strike. "I want you to picture the night of the Caldwell Anniversary Gala. It was 3 years ago. Clara was wearing a custom-made gown that shimmered like liquid silver. She felt like she was on top of the world. She leaned over to Marcus and whispered, 'I've never been this happy.' Marcus didn't look at her. He just adjusted his tie and said, 'Enjoy it while it lasts, Clara.' She thought it was a joke, a playful comment about how busy they'd be after the wedding. She didn't realize it was a sentence. The next morning, the Golden Girl didn't wake up to breakfast in bed. She woke up to a federal search warrant and the sound of her father's heart failing as he watched the news. The headline on every major financial outlet read, "Caldwell heiress accused of $50 million fraud." By noon, Isabella had discovered the evidence that cleared herself and Marcus but buried Clara. By evening, the board of directors, men Clara had known since she was a child, voted to strip her of her position. But the final blow. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the job. It was walking into her own penthouse and seeing Isabella standing there, wearing Clara's silk robe, with Marcus's arms wrapped around her waist. "Clara, honey," Isabella said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "The police are on their way. If you leave now, Marcus won't press charges for the theft. But you have to leave everything." Clara looked at the man she was supposed to marry in 4 days. "Is this what you want?" she asked, her voice a ghost of itself. Marcus looked at her with a coldness that felt like a physical strike. "I never loved a thief, Clara. I loved the Caldwell name. And Isabella, she's the one who actually knows how to keep it." Clara walked out of that building with nothing but her purse and the shoes on her feet. No car. No bank accounts. No friends, because in that world, when the money stops, the phones stop ringing. She went from a $22 million penthouse to a $60 a night motel in a single sunset. But what Isabella and Marcus forgot is that when you strip a woman of everything she has, You also strip her of everything she has to lose. They thought they had killed Clara Caldwell. They didn't realize they had just given birth to someone much, much more dangerous. This is where our journey truly begins. But I have to ask, if you were born into Clara's circumstances and lost everything to the people you trusted most, do you think you would have made the same choices? Would you have disappeared, or would you have fought back from day one? Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's look at what happened next. Because while Clara was learning how to survive on minimum wage, a man was watching her from the shadows. A man the world called a nobody. The hardest part of falling isn't the impact. It's the silence that follows when you realize no one is coming to pick you up. For Clara, reality didn't set in until she tried to use her black Amex at a diner and heard those 3 soul-crushing words. Card declined, honey. In 48 hours, Clara went from signing million-dollar contracts to scrubbing tables at a roadside stop called the Greasy Spoon. She was blacklisted from every shipping firm in the country. Isabella hadn't just stolen her life. She'd salted the earth so nothing else could grow. Clara lived in a studio apartment where the heater rattled like a dying breath and the rent was $800 a month, an amount she used to spend on a single bottle of wine. But hardship has a way of stripping away the ego. Clara learned how to survive on $15 a day. She learned that the people society calls nobodies, the janitors, the mechanics, the waitresses, were the only ones who would look her in the eye. Then came the rainy Tuesday that changed everything. Clara's beat-up 2005 sedan broke down in the middle of a literal storm. She sat in the driver's seat and finally broke. She sobbed for the life she lost, for the father she couldn't save, and for the sheer unfairness of it all. That's when a knock came on the window. It was Adrian. He was wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit with Adrian stitched over the pocket. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who worked 10-hour shifts under a chassis. "Need a hand?" he asked. His voice was deep, steady, and lacked the condescension Clara was used to from men in suits. Over the next 6 months, Adrian became her anchor. He taught her how to fix a spark plug. He shared his $5 pizza with her. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't being loved for her Caldwell title. She was being loved for her resilience. But as their passion grew, Clara noticed things. Small things. The way Adrian spoke 4 languages fluently. The way he could analyze a global economic trend while watching the evening news. The way he possessed a quiet, terrifying authority whenever someone tried to bully her at work. Clara was falling for a mechanic, but she was also finding her own fire. She began secretly documenting Isabella's mismanagement of the family company, waiting for the one moment Isabella would slip up. Then, the invitation arrived. A pity invite to the Monarch Gala, sent by Isabella to rub Clara's nose in her new, pathetic life. At this point, Clara had to choose between option A, stay in her safe, quiet life with Adrian and leave the past behind, or option B, risk everything to walk back into the lion's den and face the people who destroyed her. What would you have done? This decision would define everything that came next. They say the view from the bottom is the only one that's honest, but they never tell you how much the air hurts when you're breathing in nothing but dust and defeat. For Clara, the 18 months following her eviction were a masterclass in human suffering. The woman who once spent $4,000 on a weekend spa retreat now found herself counting pennies to see if she could afford generic ibuprofen for a fever. Her lowest point didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in a laundromat on 4th Street. She had exactly $12.45 in her checking account. Her rent was 3 days late, and her landlord, a man who smelled of stale cigars and possessed zero empathy, had already taped a pay or quit notice to her door. As she watched her only 3 work uniforms spin in the dryer, she realized she had reached the end of her rope. She wasn't just broke, she was broken. She had lost her father to a stress-induced stroke just 6 months after the scandal. She couldn't even afford a proper headstone for him. She had stood over a patch of grass in a public cemetery and promised him she would fix it. But looking at her bank balance, that promise felt like a cruel joke. This is the part of the story most people don't survive. The darkest period. Clara took on a second job cleaning offices at night, the very same buildings where she used to attend board meetings. She would wear a mask and a hoodie, terrified that a former colleague would recognize the Caldwell heiress emptying their trash cans for $14 an hour. She was exhausted. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were now cracked from industrial cleaning chemicals and stained with the grease from helping Adrian at the shop. There were nights she would sit on the floor of her shower and just cry until her lungs burned, wondering if Isabella was right. Maybe she was a nobody now. But while Clara was struggling to buy groceries, Isabella was busy setting the Caldwell empire on fire. From the outside, the company looked successful, but Clara knew the numbers. She spent her late-night breaks in the public library, tracking Caldwell Shipping's public filings. She saw the patterns. Isabella was over-leveraging the company's assets to fund her own $100 million lifestyle. Marcus was bleeding the venture capital arm dry to cover his gambling debts in Macau. They weren't just running the company. They were cannibalizing it. Pause. The shift happened on a cold Tuesday in November. Adrian found Clara slumped over a library computer, surrounded by spreadsheets and tears. He didn't offer her pity. He didn't tell her it would be okay. Instead, he handed her a cup of black coffee and a small leather-bound notebook. "If you're going to fight them," Adrian said, his voice like gravel and silk, "stop looking at what you lost. Start looking at what they're afraid of." That was the spark. Clara stopped mourning the woman she used to be and started building the woman she needed to become. She used her cleaning job to borrow discarded documents from rival firms. She used her Wharton education to map out a legal counterstrike that was so complex, it would take a genius to execute. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was predatory. Do you think Clara should have taken the evidence she found and gone to the police immediately? Or was she right to wait and plan a more public, devastating revenge? Share your perspective below. I'm curious to see who among you would play the long game. Pause. As Clara grew stronger, the relationship with Adrian deepened into something neither of them expected. She saw him differently now. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a strategist. He would challenge her logic, point out the flaws in her plan, and push her to be more ruthless. "You're still playing by their rules, Clara," he'd tell her while they ate 99-cent noodles on his porch. "They don't have rules. They have appetites. You need to become the thing that chokes them." Meanwhile, at the Thorne Caldwell estate, the walls were closing in. Isabella and Marcus were fighting. The golden couple was rotting from the inside. Marcus had spent $12 million of the company's emergency reserve on a failed tech startup, and Isabella was spiraling into paranoia. She became obsessed with the ghost of Clara. She started seeing her sister in every shadow, in every falling stock price. She needed one final win to prove she was the superior sister. That's when she decided to host the Monarch Gala. She wanted to invite the world's elite to witness her triumph, and publicly humiliate Clara one last time. She sent the invitation to Clara's cramped apartment, tucked inside a box of expensive chocolates, with a note that read, "Come see what you'll never have again. Bring your little mechanic. We need someone to park the cars." Clara held that invitation in her scarred hands. She looked at Adrian. "They want a show," she whispered. Adrian smiled. A slow, dangerous look that should have been her first clue that he was more than he claimed to be. "Then let's give them a finale they'll never forget. I'll get my suit." Clara didn't know that the suit Adrian was referring to wasn't a cheap rental. She didn't know that while she was planning a legal battle, Adrian was making phone calls that were shifting the global markets. She didn't know that the man who had been fixing her car for 18 months was about to buy the very company that had fired her. The stage was set. The players were in position. The nobody and the ghost were about to walk into a room full of gods. But what the gods didn't realize was that one of them was an imposter, and the other was a king in disguise. We're at the midpoint of this incredible story, and the tension is about to explode. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the romance, the hope for revenge, or the mystery of Adrian's true identity? Let me know in the comments. There is a specific kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a predator holding its breath. For 3 years, Clara Caldwell was a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. But ghosts can't bleed, and Clara was tired of bleeding. The transformation didn't happen in a high-end salon or a designer boutique. It happened in the blue light of a library computer and the grease-stained corners of Adrian's garage. The turning point came when Clara stopped trying to prove her innocence and started proving their guilt. She reached out to the one man her father had always trusted, and the one man Isabella had been too arrogant to keep on the payroll. Arthur Vance. Arthur was the Caldwell's former head of security, a man who knew where every digital body was buried. He had been living in a modest house in Queens, bitter and forgotten, until Clara knocked on his door. "I don't have money to pay you, Arthur," Clara told him, her voice steady. "But I have the encryption key to the server Isabella used to frame me. And I have the hunger to take back what's mine." Arthur looked at the calloused hands of the woman who used to be a princess. He didn't see a victim. He saw a general. "I don't want your money, Clara," he replied. "I want to see the look on Marcus Thorne's face when the floor drops out from under him." With Arthur's help, Clara began a series of surgical strikes. She didn't have $1 billion yet, but she had something better: inside knowledge. She knew the exact moment Caldwell Shipping was vulnerable. Using the small savings she had managed to scrape together, roughly $25,000, and a high-leverage trading account Arthur helped her set up, Clara began shorting the very company that bore her name. Every time Isabella made a reckless PR move or Marcus lost a high-stakes gamble, Clara was there, quietly profiting from their failure. First, it was a $50,000 win. Then, a $200,000 payout. As the numbers in her secret bank account grew, so did her confidence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a shadow investor, a ghost in the machine, slowly draining the lifeblood of the people who betrayed her. But the most shocking part of this transformation wasn't the money. It was Adrian. As Clara's plan accelerated, Adrian seemed to transform alongside her. He wasn't traveling for work as a mechanic anymore. He started receiving packages. Tailored suits that cost more than a car, encrypted satellite phones, and documents written in languages Clara didn't recognize. "Who are you, Adrian?" she asked him one night as they sat on the roof of his garage, looking out at the city skyline. Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the distant lights of the skyscrapers. "I'm the man who's going to make sure you never have to hide again. But first, we have a party to attend." In the weeks leading up to the Monarch Gala, Clara's recovery went into overdrive. She moved out of her studio apartment and into a secure luxury loft, not to flaunt her wealth, but to have a war room. She wasn't just reclaiming her fortune, she was reclaiming her reputation. She reached out to former board members who had been bullied into silence by Isabella. One by one, she showed them the evidence. She showed them the $12 million Isabella had embezzled into offshore accounts. She showed them the proof that Marcus had intentionally tanked the European merger for a kickback. The network of loyalty Isabella thought she had bought was actually a house of cards. And Clara was holding the match. The day before the gala, the transformation was complete. Clara stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. Gone was the exhausted waitress with the hollow eyes. In her place stood a woman who looked like she had been forged in a furnace. She had spent $15,000 on a single gown, a custom-made piece in midnight black silk. It wasn't the dress of a bride. It was the dress of an executioner. Adrian walked in behind her, wearing a tuxedo that fit him with military precision. He didn't look like a mechanic anymore. He looked like power personified. He draped a necklace around her neck, a single, flawless blue diamond that Clara knew was worth more than the Caldwell mansion. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, breathless. "Think of it as a loan," Adrian said softly, kissing her shoulder. "From a friend who wants to see justice served." Isabella and Marcus, meanwhile, were blissfully unaware. They were busy preparing for their triumph. They had spent $2 million on the gala decorations alone. They had invited the press, the politicians, and the kings of industry. They wanted the world to see them as the new royalty. They thought Clara would show up looking broken. They thought she would bring a man who smelled like motor oil and old tires. They were prepared to laugh. They didn't realize that the woman walking toward their gates wasn't coming for a seat at the table. She was coming to flip the table over and burn the room down. The cars are lining up outside the Monarch Hotel. The flashbulbs are popping. The champagne is flowing. Isabella is at the top of the grand staircase, wearing Clara's mother's tiara, believing she has won. But as the doors open and the room goes silent, she's about to realize that the nobody she invited is the most dangerous man in the room, and the sister she discarded is the one who now holds her life in her hands. At this point, Clara has transformed into someone completely different. She's no longer the naive heiress or the broken victim. She's a strategist with ice in her veins. But I have to ask you, do you think people can truly change their core nature, or is Clara just returning to who she was always meant to be? And can Adrian really be trusted, or is he just another man with a secret? Let me know what you think, because this is important for what comes next. Success is the loudest thing you can ever say to someone who expected you to fail in silence. The Monarch Gala wasn't just a party. It was a battlefield draped in velvet and gold. Inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, the air was heavy with the scent of lilies and the quiet hum of deals that would shape the global economy. Isabella stood at the top of the marble staircase, a glass of $20,000 vintage champagne in her hand, surveying her kingdom. Beside her, Marcus looked the part of a titan, but his eyes were darting toward the door. He knew the numbers were failing. He knew the walls were closing in. He needed this night to go perfectly to secure the emergency funding that would keep them out of prison. Clara sat in the back of a black sedan outside the entrance. Her heart wasn't racing. It was cold. For 3 years she had lived in the dirt so she could learn exactly how to bury the people who put her there. She looked at Adrian. "Are you ready?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer with words. He reached over and took her hand. His grip was like iron. In that moment, Clara realized she wasn't afraid of the elite anymore. She was the one they should be afraid of. The doors to the ballroom swung open. The music didn't stop, but the whispers did. Clara walked in, her black silk gown trailing behind her like a shadow. She didn't look like a disgraced heiress. She looked like an empress. Isabella's glass nearly slipped from her fingers. She practically ran down the stairs, her face contorted into a mask of fake concern. "Clara. My goodness, look at you." Isabella's voice was high and sharp, cutting through the room. "I'm so glad you used the charity pass I sent you. But honey, this is the Monarch Gala. You can't just walk in here after what you did to our family name." Marcus stepped up behind her, his face pale. "Clara, leave. No. Before security makes a scene." Clara didn't flinch. She smiled, a slow, terrifyingly calm smile. "I'm not here for the champagne, Isabella. I'm here for the inventory." Isabella laughed, a shrill, desperate sound. She looked at Adrian, who was standing quietly in the shadows behind Clara, still looking like the humble man she thought he was. "And you brought him?" Isabella sneered, pointing a finger at Adrian. "The mechanic. Did he drive the tractor here?" "Security. Get this trash out of my gala. He's a nobody." Isabella's scream echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The security team moved forward, but they stopped dead. Suddenly, the CEO of the world's largest hedge fund pushed past Isabella. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Adrian. He bowed his head so low it was nearly a kneel. "Mr. Volkov," the CEO whispered, his voice trembling. "We had no idea you were in the city." The room went tomb silent. The name Volkov was legendary. He was the Billionaire King, the shadow owner of the very bank that held the Caldwell shipping debt. He was a man whose face was never in the tabloids because he owned the tabloids. Adrian stepped out of the shadows. He didn't look at the CEO. He looked at Isabella, who was frozen, her mouth hanging open. "You called me a nobody," Adrian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "That's funny. Because 10 minutes ago, I signed the papers that officially foreclosed on every asset you think you own." Adrian didn't stop there. In front of the most powerful people in the world, the man Isabella had mocked, the man she thought was a peasant, slowly dropped to one knee. Not to Isabella. He knelt before Clara. He took her hand, the hand that was scarred from cleaning floors and fixing engines, and he kissed it. "The board of directors is waiting in the library, Clara." They've reviewed the evidence of Isabella's embezzlement. They're ready to reinstate the rightful CEO. The collapse was instantaneous. Marcus tried to run, but Arthur Vance, Clara's old head of security, was already standing at the exit with 2 federal agents. Isabella began to scream, a breakdown that was captured by every socialite's smartphone in the room. "This is my company. You can't do this," she shrieked as she was led away, her mother's tiara falling crooked on her head. Clara watched them go. She expected to feel a surge of hatred. She expected to feel the heat of revenge. But all she felt was peace. She realized that Isabella hadn't taken her life 3 years ago. She had just forced Clara to find a better one. As the orchestra began to play again, Adrian stood up and looked at Clara. No longer the mechanic, and no longer just the billionaire king. He was just the man who had stayed by her side when she had nothing. "You don't need me to fix your world anymore, Clara," Adrian whispered. Clara looked around the room, at the people who had ignored her, at the sister who had betrayed her, and then back at the man who loved her. "I don't need you to fix it," she said, leaning in. "I just want you to be in it." The nobody and the ghost walked toward the center of the dance floor. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. The fire had finished its work, and what was left was unbreakable. The confrontation is over. The nobody has been revealed, and the ghost has reclaimed her throne. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Or would you have wanted Clara to do something more direct to Isabella and Marcus? Is success really the best revenge, or did they deserve more? There's no wrong answer here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Justice doesn't always move with the speed of a lightning bolt, but when it finally strikes, it leaves nothing but ash behind. The aftermath of the Monarch Gala was a bloodbath for the Clara Caldwell reputation. Within 48 hours of Adrian's reveal, the SEC and the FBI opened a joint investigation into the stolen millions. Isabella and Marcus weren't just disgraced. They were radioactive. Marcus was banned from the financial industry for life. His reputation so toxic that even his old gambling associates wouldn't take his calls. Isabella, the woman who once spent $40,000 on a single handbag, found herself in a state-appointed legal battle she couldn't afford. The golden couple ended exactly how they lived, blaming each other for the wreckage of their lives. But while they were drowning in legal fees and public mockery, Clara was ascending. She didn't just take back her CEO chair. She revolutionized the company. Using the data she had gathered while working as a nobody, she pivoted Caldwell Shipping into green energy logistics, doubling the company's valuation to a staggering $3 billion in 18 months. The industry didn't just respect her. They feared her. She was no longer the girl who inherited a throne. She was the woman who had conquered one. Clara often thinks back to those nights in the laundromat, counting her last $12. She realizes now that Isabella's cruelty was the greatest gift she ever received. It stripped away the vanity and the naivety that would have eventually destroyed her. Hardship didn't just make her stronger. It made her real. She looks at her scarred hands and sees them as medals of honor. She learned that wealth is what you have, but character is who you are when everything else is gone. Today, Clara and Adrian live in a home that isn't defined by its price tag, but by its peace. Adrian still spends his Saturdays in a garage, though the cars are now vintage masterpieces worth millions. He remains the billionaire king of the tech world, but to Clara, he's still the man who shared a $5 pizza with her when she was a ghost. As for Isabella, she's currently serving a 5-year sentence for corporate fraud. Word is she spends her days in the prison laundry. Ironically, the same place Clara's journey toward strength truly began. Looking at where everyone ended up, do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of the choices they made? I want to hear what you think in the comments. Does the universe balance the scales, or do we have to balance them ourselves? The most expensive thing in the world isn't a diamond or a private island. It's the peace of mind that comes from knowing you survived the fire without becoming the flame. As we look back at Clara's journey, we realize this was never just a story about a bank account or a billionaire husband. It was a study in human worth. We live in a world that tries to convince us that our value is tied to the logo on our clothes or the balance in our savings. But Clara's 3 years in the dirt proved the opposite. Real wealth isn't what you can lose in a courtroom or a betrayal. Real wealth is the resilience that remains when everything else is stripped away. It's the ability to walk into a room as a waitress and hold your head as high as a queen, because you know that your throne isn't made of gold, it's made of character. If you were to sit down with Clara today, she wouldn't talk about the $3 billion valuation of her company. She'd talk about the power of the long game. People are so afraid of being nobodies, she recently told a group of young entrepreneurs. But being a nobody is a superpower. When you're at the bottom, you're invisible, and when you're invisible, you can observe. You can learn the patterns of the people at the top without their ego getting in the way. Don't rush your comeback. Build it so quietly that by the time they hear you coming, it's already over. Clara has changed. The girl who once relied on her father's name is gone. In her place is a woman who trusts her own instincts more than any contract. She has learned that the only person who can truly devalue you is you. And what about Isabella and Marcus? People often ask Clara if she feels a sense of triumph when she sees the headlines about their legal woes. The truth might surprise you. She feels almost nothing. Bitterness is a poison you drink hoping the other person dies. Clara refused to take a sip. She realized that Isabella's betrayal wasn't a reflection of Clara's worth. It was a reflection of Isabella's poverty of spirit. Isabella lived in a mansion but had the heart of a thief. Clara lived in a studio apartment but had the heart of a titan. Justice wasn't served when the handcuffs clicked. Justice was served the moment Clara decided that Isabella's opinion no longer had the power to hurt her. The greatest revenge wasn't taking the company back. It was reaching a level of success and happiness where she forgot Isabella existed. There is a lesson here for all of us. You might be in your waitress phase right now. You might have been betrayed by someone you loved, or you might be looking at a bank balance that makes you want to give up. But remember this, a setback is just a setup for a reveal. The world will try to label you. They will call you a failure, a nobody, or a ghost. Let them underestimate you. Use that silence to sharpen your skills and harden your resolve. True success is building a life so authentic that you don't need a gala to prove your worth. It's finding the Adrian in your life, the person who sees you when you're invisible, and more importantly, it's about seeing yourself. The story of the Caldwell heiress and the Billionaire King is a fairy tale, yes. But the core of it is real. Integrity is a currency that never devalues. Love is a shield that never breaks. And resilience is a fire that never goes out. Clara didn't win because she married a rich man. She won because she became a woman a rich man, and the world couldn't help but respect. She broke the generational pattern of greed and replaced it with a legacy of excellence. As we close this chapter on Clara's life, take a look at your own. What is your blue diamond? What is the strength you're forging in your own private fires? Because your story isn't over yet. In fact, the most dramatic part is usually just about to begin. We've traveled a long road together through this story. We've seen the heights of luxury and the depths of despair. Now that you've seen the full picture, I have one final question for you. What do you believe is the true definition of success? Is it the power you wield over others, or the power you find within yourself? There are no wrong answers, only perspectives. At the end of every great storm, the world looks different. Not because the landscape has changed, but because you have. We've spent the last 3 hours walking alongside Clara Caldwell. We saw her as the untouchable princess of a shipping empire, and we watched, breathless, as she was stripped of her name, her home, and her dignity. We felt the bite of the cold on those nights she worked for pennies, and we felt the spark of hope when a nobody named Adrian reached out a hand to help her up. But the most incredible part of this journey wasn't the moment the Billionaire King knelt before her. It wasn't the diamonds or the reclaimed penthouse. The real turning point was the moment Clara decided that she was enough, even when she had nothing. This story matters because it is a mirror. It's not just about one woman's revenge. It's about the universal truth that our circumstances are often just a test of our resolve. Clara's journey reminds us that the people who try to break you are usually the ones most afraid of your potential. Isabella and Marcus thought they were taking Clara's life, but they were actually doing her a favor. They removed the distractions. They forced her to find a love that wasn't bought and a strength that couldn't be stolen. They traded a temporary fortune for a permanent legacy, and in the end, they lost everything because they built their lives on the shifting sands of greed. So, what does this mean for you? Maybe you're feeling invisible right now. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you trusted, or you're facing a mountain that feels too high to climb. I want you to look at Clara. I want you to remember that your current situation is a chapter, not the whole book. Don't let the labels people put on you stick. If they call you a failure, let that be the fuel for your fire. If they call you a nobody, use that anonymity to build something so great they can't ignore it. Your worth is not determined by your bank account or the people who walked away from you. Your worth is determined by your willingness to get back up, one more time, and keep moving toward the light. Success is a beautiful thing, but integrity is what makes it last. Clara and Adrian's story proves that when you lead with character and back it up with a relentless work ethic, the universe has a way of balancing the scales. You don't need to chase revenge. You just need to chase excellence, and justice will follow in its wake. True power isn't making people bow. It's being the kind of person who inspires them to stand taller. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and success, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. Whether it's a lesson on love, a thought on business, or just a moment that made you cheer, I want to hear it. I read every single one of your comments, and your insights are what make this community so special. Remember, you are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by how you respond when life tests you. Clara proved that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so beautiful that your critics become irrelevant. They can take your money, they can take your title, but they can never take your fire unless you hand them the match. Until next time, stay strong, stay focused, and never let anyone convince you that you're nothing. You're everything you choose to become. Remain blessed, and I am the story keeper.